Okay, when I look at D immediately, this one looks very different from the others out of the gate. This one seems like it's got two mounds going on. I would call this one bimodal. And it also seems like it's got a tail sort of going off here to the right. So I would classify this as right skewed. When you've got bimodal or multimodal going on, you should talk about the two different modes then. What are those two different kind of typical values? So it looks like we've got one mode here around the 150 mark. And that we've got another one here maybe around the 225 mark. And this one it's time in minutes, so these are minutes. And I'm going to think about this as far as hours go. This is approximately 2.5 hours. And this is approximately 4 hours. Not perfect, but about. And that helps me, that gives me a little bit better of an idea about what I'm talking about here. Minutes are a little bit confusing. So we've talked about the shape, we've talked about the typical values, the spread. I need to bring some context into this because, again, I've got numbers from a little over 100 to a little over 400, which may not seem super far apart in general. But if I read below what this is talking about, it's finishing times for marathons. So at that point, if I look at it and I think finishing a marathon in a little over, like around 2 hours, and finishing a marathon up here, this is a little over around to the 2 hour mark. And if you get up all the way up here over 400 minutes, you're getting around 7 hours at that point. So if I think the context-wise, the difference between finishing a marathon in 2 hours and finishing in 7 hours, at that point, I feel like there's a lot of spread. I would be over here still running while these people over here are taking a nap for 5 hours. So when you kind of think about it that way, I feel like there's a very large spread, a big difference in that. Now, if we read a little bit more closely down here, it actually says that this data, this graph, is showing two different marathons. One was a small number of runners in the 2012 Olympic Games, and one was a large number of amateur runners in Portland, Oregon. So how is this playing into the shape of the histogram? Well, I certainly think that's causing the bimodalness. Because mode 1 is probably for the Olympic runners. And mode 2 is probably your amateur runners. I also think that's probably causing the skewness. I think if you put a bunch of amateur runners in a marathon, you're definitely going to have those few stragglers way out here on the end. They will have some really slow finishers. So what this is kind of leading to is that if you see a bimodal or a multimodal distribution, a lot of times what that means is that there were two completely different groups that were combined into one before they made their graph. So it's good to report those different values. Like that's why we reported two different modes and we mentioned that kind of stuff because really they could be talking about two different populations. They probably should have taken that data and separated it out and made two different graphs. Okay, so lastly, this graph represents, this is the length of time dentists spend with their patients. So we've got time in minutes across the bottom and frequency on the y-axis. I definitely see bimodalness going on again. However, this one doesn't really seem like it's very skewed. It seems pretty symmetric. It kind of has the one mound, the other mound, and down, and there's not a lot of skew going on. So I would also call this one symmetric. However, for bimodal, we need to talk about mode 1 and mode 2, are two different kind of center values. Looks like this first mode is somewhere around the 12.5 minute mark. And the second one is around the 22.5 minute mark. As far as spread goes, when I think about going to the dentist and making a dentist appointment, spending anywhere between 10 to 30 minutes there doesn't really seem like a lot of difference to me. I would have built time into my schedule to be there for any of those lengths of times. It wouldn't surprise me to be there somewhere in that category. So I don't really feel like there's a lot of spread here. So I would call this one small spread. Now, commenting on this bimodalness, the idea that's coming to my mind is that there's probably a bit of a difference between these patients down here and these patients here. I am guessing, again, this is just making a guess, I don't have anything to back this up, but just a thought, is that these are probably just checkups, just cleanings, routine things like that. And probably these patients up here who are taking a little bit longer, that might be something like getting fillings or other procedures that might take a little bit more time. So again, maybe there are kind of two different groups